TSH, all these hypothalamus pituitary complex, prolactin, other very other important vasopressin, a number of different hormones. But again, being very heavily controlled by the pineal melatonin. But in the skin, we have the melanocytes that are present in skin. They have been present from the time of during the growth of the fetus. Again, remember the neural crest, where when that tube formed and then the end of the tube ballooned out, and the tip of that tube is called the neural crest. And from that place, the neural crest, these cell types then moved out, and they moved all over the body, and they positioned themselves right where the dermis or deep layer of skin met the upper layer of skin called the epidermis. And right at that junction is where we find the position of the melanocytes. Melanocytes do some very powerful things. They secrete the hormone known as melanin, not melatonin, but melanin, into skin cells as these skin cells grow up from their bed. And it injects the melanin into the skin cells. It passes by this junctional layer and moves upward. Just like it looks like a hypodermic needle being put right inside the cell and given its shot of melanin. The melanin, as it goes into the cell, then organizes itself as a uniform or a block sheet over the nucleus of the cell to protect the cell from ultraviolet radiation. And why is that important? It's important because these intense rays of the sun, when it hits the nucleus of the cell, may knock out certain codes in that DNA and call for misreading of the code, and the cell will then will die or become cancerous. Now, I've spent most of my time out on the West Coast, and they had this thing called the Beach Boys and the Surfer Bunnies and all this, where all of those folks who spent, white folks, without much melanin in their skin, without any protection, by the age 28, 27, the skin was shot. It looked like the skin of a person who was 50 years old. Had lost its elasticity, full of holes, big pores, didn't even have normal perspiration you and I ordinarily have. And many of them have long since passed on with skin cancer, or had various skin lesions. So that's the result of not having your right kind of shield. But again, what does melanin do in another kind of way? The melanin present in that layer of skin provides a very important role, which plays a critical part of the history of the unfoldment of the human family and the unraveling to the degree of the human family. In the deeper layer of skin, where the blood vessels are, the hormone known as vitamin D passes through in blood. Passes in blood. It is formed in an inactive state called vitamin D1 and D2. As sunlight penetrates the skin, it actually energizes the hormone and makes it into an active form called vitamin D3, D4. The active form of vitamin D, as it passes through your intestinal tract, is what pulls calcium out of food into your body. Without the active form of vitamin D, you could eat all the calcium that you would want, and it would run right through, and you would have very little calcium being retained in your body. People who lack vitamin D develop a condition known as rickets, bowed bones, bow legs, notchy ribs, soft bones. Women in their later years who have problems with vitamin D metabolism also develop osteoporosis, soft bones, stooped over. How many of you seen black women stoop over like this in their 50s or their 60s? Not a regular occurrence. What about others? Oh, rather common. So what we're saying is that vitamin D in the inner layer, deeper layer of skin, as it is being energized by sunlight, is a critical thing to consider. But notice, we all know by this point in time that all people of the human family came from Africa. And people who came from his parent stock indeed had black skin. There's no way that you're going to be able to survive in Africa near the equator with intense ultraviolet light and sunlight and not have dark skin. Without dark skin, you will fry. Your skin cells will become cancerous, and you will not survive. But as our people with skin color move to other parts of the planet, i.e. Europe, and especially past the 54 degree latitude, it was okay for a while until the periodic ice age would come on. When the ice ages came on, those people who had dark skin color had a problem. Because dark skin in a condition in which you don't have much sunlight and a very low angle of sunlight in the sky and large amounts of cloud cover is dangerous. You will tend to develop a condition known as rickets, in which the sunlight, you're not receiving much sunlight, you're wearing animal furs to stay warm, the sunlight is of a very weak strength, it cannot penetrate the dark skin color upper layer of skin enough to energize vitamin D. And therefore those people develop very little active forms of vitamin D and develop rickets. What does that mean? When we look at the skeletons of people in the beginning of the Ice Age, what do we see? Black people with rickets. We see the skeleton, we see the ricket bone type. And we look at it further on to the Ice Age, the rickets is no longer there, meaning what? That their skin color became progressively lighter and they could make vitamin D. But what was the problem? Did you develop vitamin D and you lost your skin color and you survived? But what was the penalty? At what price? And here is a very, very critical point. You developed that at the risk of developing too much calcium in your body, and you lost your spiritual vision. What do you mean by that, Dr. King? That calcium, present in large amounts, began to calcify the pineal gland. So we find that European populations, European African populations, at the pineal is calcified in the majority of the adult population. And it's 60-80% and above in European populations in Boston, San Francisco, Stockholm, Sweden, calcified pineals. In black populations, 5 to 15%. And the darker the population, the lower the incidence. In Nigeria, 5%. Cincinnati, 10%. Watts, California, 15%. In a calcified pineal, the pineal releases only 1/2 as much hormone as a non-calcified pineal. That means, so in other words, we're saying that people who survived in Ice Age Europe did survive. They lost rickets. They couldn't make vitamin D because they had light skin. And they couldn't make enough vitamin D in those Ice Age conditions. But they had a reduced level of spiritual vision. They had that then, and they sure enough have it now. Sure enough have it now. That's very clear. So now we have a crossroads in which history and biology and chemistry are saying the same thing. Despite the big lie. Despite the big lie. Dr. King, in science, there is no such thing as bias. Says who? Whose science? Printed in whose textbook? Funded by whose funding source? No. Science is through the mind of a man and a woman. And if they've got a bias, they will express their bias.